This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman
and Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. Bam, we're back with another episode of your favorite niche podcast about the, maybe not so niche-ish. Yeah. No, this is not the Nietzsche episode. We're here for a dark room with, well, it's like Brad said, it's Kautzmania. Before we started recording all week, my very own brother Kellen is here, and we are going to talk more about the father of LSD, the American father of LSD, Timmy Leary, by way of baby bumbling, bibbling, bobbling. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That's like a warm-up. Baba Ram Dass.
Baba Ram Dass, yeah.
Yes. Kellen, welcome to Art of Darkness. Welcome to the Dark Room. How are you?
I love you, and I miss you, and I care about you. And Kevin instilled something by way of my mind to the kids, to Annika and Phoenix, and that was, I don't know how many years ago it was, but he hit me with one of those, I'm proud of you, and he meant it. And I tell everyone I'm proud of him now, but that was the genesis of me telling everyone that I'm proud of them all the time.
Oh, this is beautiful. I love this.
Men need to be a little more emotional with one another in terms of effusive praise. I think sometimes we're very quick to criticize in the culture, and we are very quick to gripe and point out the negative, and shy to talk about when we feel great and when things are going well in an earnest way that isn't a pissing contest.
Right.
And so I did mean that, Kellen, and I am proud of you. Tell people before we really dig into the episode, tell people a little bit about yourself, what you got going on. And again, this is a dark room. We're going to focus on Timmy Leary here, but by way of Baba Ram Dass. And if you've listened to the Timmy Leary core episode, you'll have a sense of, obviously, the good doctor and what he was up to. We went for what, we went for 4 hours and 20 minutes. By accident. And totally by accident. Wasn't planned at all. And but we didn't necessarily go that deeply into that relationship and how intimate and important that bromance was that they had. So we're gonna touch on that a little further. But first, Kellen, tell listeners of the pod about yourself. What you got going on?
Well, they're here for the Baba Ram Dass. So let's talk about him by way of the way I currently interact with my body. I am a firm believer that the biological machine of the human body is precisely that. I've been listening to a lot of near-death experience podcasts. Shout out to Jeff Mara podcast. And there's a lot of similar through lines to what Ram Dass was talking about via Neem Karoli Baba, which is essentially when people die, they tend to perceive themselves as a continuous consciousness. That consciousness can see in all 360 degrees. It moves at the speed of thought. And it is not bound by time nor space, and that they recognize that everything that we experience on this planet is by choice, and that was chosen prior to our incarnation. So we wanted this for very specific reasons. And one of the Ram Dass pieces of wisdom that I found so intoxicating is a old Hindu practice, which is starting with your fingernails and saying, I'm not my fingernails. Most people can get there. That's not hard. I'm not my hair. Well, sure, I'm not my hair. I can't even feel it. Okay, well, I'm not my heart. Well, yeah, I suppose.
Brad is definitely not his hair.
I subscribe to this completely. I am not my hair at all.
Brad has wonderful eyebrows that I hope you can envision if you're just listening to the podcast. Imagine the most spectacular eyebrows.
Svelte. He's like a dolphin on land. And of course, we are now on YouTube at youtube.com/@artofdarkpod. You can find all our links at artofdarkpod.com. We always do an additional 20 or 30 minutes for Patreon. Patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Those little mini episodes after each episode are called After Dark. And I know Brad and Kellen will come back to your epic train of thought there, but Brad has something prepared for today's After Dark. So if you want more, what are you going to get on today's After Dark, Brad?
Yeah, we're going to go a little bit deeper into the controversy at Harvard that ousted Ram Dass, Richard Alpert at the time, and Tim Leary. And we're going to discuss how a man who would later become a very prominent figure in this sort of integrative health world, organic food world, all of that was played a key role in getting them kicked out of Harvard. And it's a very interesting story. There's conspiratorial elements. It's backstabbing. It's jealousy. It's bitter rivalry. All of that. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Perfect for After Dark. Patreon.com/artofdarkpod. Get in now. $3 goes to $5 on Jan 1st. If you get in now, give yourself a Christmas present, a Hanukkah present, a Kwanzaa, whatever you, just a secular. Hey, listen, you reincarnated and chose before you were born. You chose to subscribe to the Patreon. So get in now. Yeah, really exciting stuff. And the book club coming up. You know about that by now, hopefully. Kellen, go on. You were really quite deep there. So we were imagining I'm not my finger, I'm not my hair.
So Kevin and Brad aren't going to guarantee complete and total spiritual enlightenment for signing up for Patreon, but I will.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
He's going to give you the real secrets.
Waves of enlightenment. If you are to help these two individuals in their spiritual journey.
Well, you know what's funny, Kellen? You've been going on, or you've been not going on, listening to near-death podcasts, and now you are on a death podcast. Mm-hmm. Every single one of our subjects is dead. So you've crossed to the other side, my friend.
Very exciting. It's fun here. It's warm.
Mm-hmm.
It's like an unconditional hug.
I'm very interested that you tapped into that near-death experience as a way of talking about Ram Dass and his teaching. I've listened to my share of that stuff with a half skeptical eye, and man, after you get through about 10 or 15 of these stories, it's pretty hard to argue against these people, I think. And I certainly don't have the grounding to argue against them. And then like you're saying, then you actually have to reckon your cosmological conception has to reckon with this. It's literally mind-blowing. Yeah.
I think that Jesus had a near-death experience. I think he literally died. Had these experiences that thousands and thousands of people have had. Pushed open that stone wall of that cave, and 2,000 years ago, it became the story that no one could tell another story for all that time, because it was just that epic. Because you see God, you meet God, and God gives you all kinds of fun stuff to think about, and then says, back to your body you go. Your mission's not over. Quick segue. We are in the midst of producing a documentary film through a nonprofit that I am the chair of called HopeLink. And I met a homeless gentleman. His name's William. First time I interviewed him, he talked about wheeling his wheelchair into oncoming traffic because sleeping when it's 31 degrees out with no food in Las Vegas is not exactly 5-star accommodations. He cooks his ramen noodles in the sunlight. And we had a conversation on film, and then the next month when I came back for another round of interviews, he had been hit by a bus and died. So William had a near-death experience, and came back, and he had just that classic died, met God. In his case, met Jesus. Some people see their complete self. Some people see there's all sorts of fun stuff that happens when people die. He happened to meet Jesus, came back. And then, believe it or not, he was in my heart the other day, and I went to downtown to find him as he was having a heart attack. And so got him onto into an ambulance. So my sense of love as the fundamental vibration that makes up the fabric of space and time is definitely on my mind a lot lately. I am all in on this notion, and this is all because of Ram Dass. I mean, Ram Dass, there is, like, if I had to pick a guru, it's Ram Dass. It is. I mean, Christ growing up, sure, me and a whole bunch of other people, Jesus was definitely one of those big motivators for me. Siddhartha Gautama, I think he probably starved himself to death under the Bodhi tree. He probably had a near-death experience too, came back with the whole idea of samsara, the wheel of time, multiple incarnations. And so
what do you think? Sorry, this is something I've been thinking about, and I've been meaning to research. What do you think about the notion that baptisms originally were intentional drownings to cause near-death experiences?
I think that is absolutely what they were. And that's so interesting that you said that.
Yeah.
Drugs kill you, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know if you knew that or not, but they kill you. Yeah. And it's the artists flirting with death that causes these out-of-body experiences as a reminder of what you actually are.
Right.
So Ram Dass.
Well, yes. and I mean, this is part of what the psychedelic experience that Timothy Leary was such an advocate for, and other people, and Ram Dass was as well. He tempered it a little bit later in his career, but especially early on. I mean, it was give acid to basically anybody who could handle it, and maybe some people who couldn't. And part of the idea of that is especially when you tie it to the sort of the shamanic tradition, is you're going to go through what at least feels like a death, even if physically that's not what's happening to your actual living systems. It is experientially very much like a death, and thereby hopefully you will gain some of the same wisdom and insights that people do when they actually do have these death experiences.
Oh, I mean, just hitting the nail on the head. Yeah, I mean, ayahuasca kills you. Blood vomiting. I mean, people are smoking toad venom. I mean, this is killing you, but here's the thing about death. I mean, you want to get big muscles. Well, you got to destroy some muscles along the way, don't you? You got to rip those muscle fibers. You got to let them regrow.
You got to get kicked out of Harvard.
Get kicked out of Harvard. How about?
I want to anchor us in time here now, because I'm sure we could go on. We're available for children's parties, whatever you want. Sweet 16s, bar mitzvahs, if you want to talk about that.
Kevin.
Quinceañeras, all inclusive. Very good. The first time you show your teen daughter or son or whatnot, The Shining. That's a rite of passage.
Before and after. Listen to what we do. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Right. We will do a trip sit while they watch The Shining. Actually, maybe you should do that with your own children. Yeah, you pick one. In any case, I have a link from Harvard University. That's a good school. That I heard. I think Epstein had an office there, but we'll forgive him that. In any case, this is from the Department of Psychology at Harvard University, where, of course, Baba Ram Dass was Richard Alpert, and Timmy Leary was, of course, Dr. Timothy Leary. Alpert came from money, didn't he? He came from...
He did. His dad, I believe, came from railroad money. I believe is primarily where it came from. But then would become involved in a number of, sort of civic. He put forward some of the money and helped to found Brandeis University.
Right. I recall that from, I think, the episode.
And famously, Ram Dass, during his many speeches, would often say that he was middle class. And so sometimes he would say upper middle class. And that was one of the things, for all of the ways that I love Ram Dass, that I would always turn my head to the side a little bit and go, were you though?
Middle class? I don't know. Do you know what middle means? Yeah.
That is one of the most abused terms, phrases in the English language is middle class.
Middle means there's some people above you, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, in any case, here's their article. 1920 to 1996, and this is Timmy Leary, of course, that's his The Effects of Psychotropic Drugs. One of the stranger claims to fame of the Department of Psychology at Harvard is that it was once home to two of the leading figures in the 1960s counterculture and culture of psychedelic drugs. In 1960, two promising young psychologists at Harvard, Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, began to explore the effects of psychotropic substances on the human mind. They reasoned that psychology is the study of the mind, including its relationship to the brain, body, and environment. Psychology, they argued, has a legitimate interest in how cognition, perception, and emotion are affected by mind-altering substances. At the time, the possible dangers of researching such substances were not as well known as they were in subsequent decades. With a PhD in psychology from Stanford, Richard Alpert came to Harvard in 1953 as an assistant professor. In the early part of his career, Alpert conducted personality and social psychology research. Timmy Leary received his PhD in psychology from Berkeley and came to lecture at Harvard in 1959. Leary's early research focused on the interaction of dimensions of personality and social relationships. He also worked as a psychotherapist. Shortly after Leary's arrival at Harvard, he and Alpert started the Harvard Psilocybin Project. Psilocybin is an entheogenic hallucinogen which naturally occurs in certain species of mushrooms. Leary and Alpert sought to document its effects on human consciousness by administering it to volunteer subjects, volunteers, sign me up, and recording their real-time descriptions of the experience. At the time of Leary and Alpert's research at Harvard, neither LSD nor psilocybin were illegal substances in the U.S. By 1962, various faculty members and administrators at Harvard were concerned about the safety of Leary and Alpert's research subjects and critiqued the rigor of their unorthodox methodology. In particular, the researchers conducted their investigations when they, too, were under the influence of psilocybin. Mm-hmm. Leary and Alpert's colleagues challenged the scientific merit of their research, as well as the seemingly cavalier attitude with which it was carried out. That is to say, poorly controlled conditions, non-random selection of subjects. Editorials printed in the Harvard Crimson accused Alpert and Leary of not merely researching psychotropic drugs, but actively promoting their recreational use. Just two more paras here. Leary and Alpert insisted on the scientific purpose of their endeavors and agreed to policies intended to protect their subjects, including a prohibition on participation by undergraduate students. When you get to grad school, suddenly you can handle it, I guess?
Right.
Yeah, you've been hooked in enough by the culture. Clearly, it can't damage you that much anymore. You're already so far gone. Initially, they're just graduate students. Right. Give them all the drugs you want. Initially, Leary and Alpert only used volunteer, if not fully informed graduates. Well, there is no such thing as a fully informed graduate student. If not fully informed,
but listen,
graduates,
you're not paying the graduate students. You got to incentivize them somehow. You know what I mean? Listen,
yeah, you're gonna have to take out some serious loans, but we've got some drugs.
Yeah.
I mean, ironically, it really hasn't changed much, has it? Yeah. However, in the spring of 1963, Harvard was forced to dismiss Alpert after he administered psilocybin to an undergraduate student.
Let's save the rest of that for After Dark. That gets into our After Dark territory, but that's also a little presage of what we're going to talk about in the After Dark.
All right. So, I want to finish this real quick. Leary was also fired from the university, and the Harvard Psilocybin Project came to an abrupt end. Discredited by their lack of scientific rigor and failure to observe established research guidelines, Timmy Leary and Richard Alpert were both banished from academia, but that was far from the end of their public lives. Both men went on to become icons of the psychedelic drug, counterculture, and human potential movement. Leary became famous for the slogan, "Tune in, turn on, drop out." Elpert, under the name Baba Ram Dass, wrote a popular book called Be Here Now, described as a modern spiritual classic. And that is Harvard, their psychology department, reconciling with the fact that they produced these two, or they didn't produce anyway, they sent into Exodus these two major figures who, of course, continue to influence and move culture.
Yeah, in a huge way, both of them in slightly different ways, though, right? I mean, they were friends. I don't. There was we were mentioning there is a documentary about the nature of their friendship and how towards the end of Timothy Leary's life, he and Ram Dass kind of came back together and mended fences. I mean, I don't think Ram Dass didn't really keep enemies, right? So there's not really going to be a long-standing grudge with Ram Dass. I just don't think that was in his nature. But they did start out. Interestingly, Kevin, I was doing some reading in preparation for the After Dark, and a lot of the stuff that was going on with Tim Leary, not being at Harvard, going down to do mushrooms in Mexico and that kind of thing. And this was after his wife had died, as we discussed in the core episode. Tim Leary's wife had died. Ram Dass
killed herself.
Yeah, she killed herself. Richard Alpert was actually babysitting the Leary children.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
So there was a time period where Alpert actually lived in Leary's house and was the dad, and he was single parenting Leary's children for periods of time, which I just found really, really interesting.
When did he become Baba Ram Dass?
Oh, okay. So let's touch on a few things. So on Ram Dass's puja table, which in the Hindu tradition is when I was a Hare Krishna. Let's start there. Okay, I used to be a Hare Krishna, which is super fun. Not sure if you've ever gone down that particular path, but wow. That's good times. So
I think we should go hard into your Hare Krishna experience on the After Dark.
Can do that. Yeah.
Can we? Are you willing to talk more about it there later?
Sure. So let's put it to there's just, I mean, how many hours do we have? So anyway, there's this thing called a puja table, which is very common. And in Ram Dass's puja table, what he did at one point was he put Neem Karoli Baba and George Bush up on his puja table at the same time, because the spiritual practice of loving everyone, and when I say one, I don't mean people. I mean, if it's a one, you need to love it. So that's the atom of cancer inside of you right now. It's, the worst demonic sort of force you can imagine on planet Earth. It's the most mundane force on planet Earth. It's a speck of wind.
It's the people everyone who listen to dozens of episodes of Art of Darkness and don't subscribe. We love you too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. As difficult as it is.
So, that's Ram Dass in a nutshell, right? So the idea that he would hold a long-term standing grudge with Timothy Leary is exactly what Brad just mentioned. It doesn't really fit his character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, reminds me of there's a Ram Dass teaching that is, to me, not that he invented it, but where I got it from anyway. That's one of the simplest and yet most challenging things I've ever tried to integrate into my life. And I think about it constantly. I have reminders of it all over the place. And it comes to this love everyone thing. It's love everyone and tell the truth. Yeah. And at first it seems like that's, oh, fine. Yeah, of course, those are two. But the power and the challenge of them is actually how those two things contradict each other. How difficult it is. You think you're being loving towards somebody, but you're actually kind of being dishonest, right? And trying to get those two things happening at the same time is like a lifelong challenge in my experience. So
I think that's so beautiful. That's so true. And honestly, I'm just doing the first one.
Right.
I have said the words, and some people believe that I'm not even the one saying them in my own head. There are those that say that your mind is just a radio tuner, and I'm tuned into a frequency in which I hear the words love everyone on repeat for years.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah.
So Kevin asked a question. So Ram Dass, Richard Alpert was in what he referred to as somebody training. And he says that pretty much everyone is in somebody training. You got to be somebody, a lawyer, a doctor, a this, a that. And so we kind of put on this personality suit And at Harvard, him and Leary were obviously very disillusioned with Freudian psychology and psychoanalysis and everything that was kind of in vogue in that world at that time. And he ends up, after getting fired, kind of feeling like what he was doing wasn't actually helping anybody, like it wasn't really in service to anyone. Now, it's a good thing that his father owned a very, whatever he did, had a lot of money, because when he ended up going to India with fists full of acid, he was looking for Mr. Guru. And I think it's so funny that he judged gurus in India based on their reaction to acid. So he would find these gurus and he would go, hey, I got this drug, whatever, this magic tablet. And if they were greedy or they wanted it, he's like, yeah, you're not the real deal. Like, look at all that attachment. Like, give me the drugs, I want to try them. And then they all trip balls. And he's like, yeah, you're not for me. And he just kept going around and he just couldn't find anybody that kind of fit that idea.
Which is interesting, because it's not like he thought LSD was fraudulent in any way. He was, my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kellen, was he was trying to, his notion, part of his idea of going to India to find a guru was he never wanted to come down, right? It was like LSD had gotten into this spiritual, what he thought of as some kind of spiritually advanced probably isn't the right word, place, and he never wanted to come down. As soon as the LSD wore off, you came down. And then, so if you can find a guru who's unimpressed by acid, then they must have the secret to staying, quote, high all the time.
This would be a great idea for maybe a short film or a feature film about Baba Ram Dass. You do it like a spaghetti western, but it's called A Fistful of Acid.
Yeah, that's hilarious.
I would watch that.
Well, I'd watch that too.
Right.
That makes at least two of us.
Yeah, he draws it and the guys, freak out. But then he gets to Neem Karoli Baba and gives acid to Neem Karoli Baba.
Let's if I may. So all right, so he's in India and he keeps dropping, trying to get acid to everybody. And yes, you were right. The way he described it was getting kicked out of heaven. He's like, get to heaven, get kicked out of heaven, go to heaven, get kicked. He's like, so it's just not right. It's not permanent. So he ends up meeting a Westerner, which is always the irony. He met this like surfer dude who was this total like Hindu barefoot hippie guy, whose name I can't recall. And that guy kind of
Bhagavan Das.
Oh, yeah. Somebody look it up. But we're not doing whoever this was the justice he deserves. But he was this, sort of had been in India longer, had been hanging out with these sort of things longer. And his guru was Neem Karoli Baba. And so they went on this sort of pilgrimage, and this as monks, essentially. So they were wearing the full robes, and people would give them food. And in India, obviously, the culture is very, very different. They will support you as a holy man, regardless of whether you're a Westerner. It's just, you're a holy man. And so this ragtag team was trying to find Neem Karoli Baba, and Richard, Dr. Alpert, former Harvard professor, is now basically having this kid from, I think, Santa Monica kind of tour him around India, so what a fall from grace in regards to like status,
Yeah.
And so anyway, he's all barefoot and it's hot and it's awful. And and they're just looking for this stupid guru, like, where's this I want to swear so badly. Where's this guru?
Right.
You could fucking swear on this pod.
Yeah, I know. I'm just, I'm so used to being on podcasts where you can't swear.
Oh no. Yeah.
I'll get over it.
Right.
And so he's like, how do you find this guy? And he's like, hey man, this is different. Like, you find them when God wants you to find them. That's just how this goes, man. And so they go on this, long trek to finally show up, and then they do, at long last, they stumble upon, through the word of mouth and everything, where Neem Karoli Baba's at. And I think the first interaction, the first thing the hippie friend does is a full, I always jack up this word, prostration. Is that the word? Prostrate at the feet of someone?
Yeah.
And so he's like feet on this guy, or what was it? Like lips on this guy's feet, sort of like, God incarnate, thou shalt bow down sort of thing. And Dr. Alpert's like, fuck this.
Right.
Like, this is not, I have no interest in, this is fucking Looney Tunes land. And what have I got myself into? And this is the worst. And he's like, all right. And then the first thing that Neem Karoli Baba says to Ram Dass, and for all the Ram Dass aficionados out there, I apologize if I'm butchering the story, but in my memory, it's, oh, you got a nice car there, because they took his like fancy car because he's middle class,
right?
And
he has a car in India,
right?
Tootling around, right? Yeah.
No, it was actually like a friend's car. I forget how he got it, but it doesn't matter. It was a friend's car. It was a friend's car, and and Neem Karoli Baba says to him, "You give it to me," and he's like, and he's just fucking with him. Just
right.
Like, and so he kind of gets into the camp and this, that, and the third, and he has like no dialogue with Neem Karoli Baba at all. But that night, he's looking up at the stars, and he's thinking about his mom, Richard is, who died of spleen cancer, I want to say.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then he goes to bed, wake up, and then Neem Karoli Baba the next day comes up to him and he says, "Last night you were thinking about your mom." And he goes, and he goes, "She died, spleen." And he's like, "Oh shit." And that's where his whole, because then his mind had to do there's no internet, no one in India knows anything about my mother. How does this like weird looking dude with a blanket over him know any of this shit? Like, and it blew his mind. He blew his mind without acid. And so he's like, "Oh, okay, all right." And then he ended up giving Neem Karoli Baba acid. And like when he presented it, he was very nonchalant about it. He's like, he didn't care. He's like, fuck, whatever. But when he took it, he gave him like a mega dose, some like ridiculous amount of acid. And this is Alpert, like in his acid heyday. So he knows the amount of acid that will like force you to like sit on God's lap and tell him what you want for Christmas. And so anyway,
no.
Yeah. Just quick aside, some near-death people literally describe the voice of God as like Santa. It's so funny.
Really? That's hilarious.
They say, they're like, "Hey man, sound like Santa to me."
Cozy. It's all gonna work out.
Gives him the fistful of acid, and he no change. That was the big sort of moment, was like, this fucker did not change. He just was sort of the same old. And then the Neem Karoli Baba stories, he ended up writing a book of his miracles. Neem Karoli Baba did crazy. There was crazy shit. Like whatever magic you think exists in the universe, he would just put the blanket over his head and then like astrally project places and like give messages to people. And I'll tell one quick Neem Karoli Baba story because I have no idea where this falls in the Ram Dass timeline. But anyway, Richard Alpert is given the name Ram Dass. Das means servant. Ram is from the Ramayana, which is the story of Ram, which is the incarnation of God, and his wife getting stolen. And so in the Ramayana,
wife, please.
Yeah.
I forget the name of the demon, but there was this enlightened demon.
All right. Yeah.
There was this enlightened demon in the Ramayana who had all these like millions of incarnations. And then his final incarnation was a demonic one, which is so different in Hinduism than it is in my experience in Western traditions, which is you would never look at Satan and go, this is just as an incarnation before total like divine embrace with God, right? Like that's not a narrative you hear in Christianity much. But in Hinduism it is. And Ravana, the demon Ravana, steals, I forget her name, Gopti. Anyway, Ram's wife. And you might be familiar with Hanuman, which is a big through line with Ram Dass too, because Hanuman is like his spirit animal, basically. Hanuman goes to save Ram's wife, comes back, and this is a Ram Dass story that's famous. So Hanuman comes back after saving Ram's wife from the evil demon Ravana, and Ram, God, says to Hanuman, "I will give you anything in all of the universes that have ever or will ever exist. It's yours for saving my wife. What do you want?" And Hanuman's answer to God is, "Release me from the tentacles of egoism." So that's fun.
I wish for 3 more wishes.
Right. Yeah, that's what I'm wishing for. Yeah.
Why 3 more?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Never saw it coming.
Yeah.
Right.
And of course, the fact that we all have infinite wishes is the point. But anyway, so he's given Ram Dass as, so that's Ram from the Ramayana. And then, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. The last part of the Maha Mantra is Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, which is Ram, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, Ram Dass gets his name, servant of Ram. And that's pretty beautiful.
Yeah. Well, wasn't there, there's so many places you can go with the whole Neem Karoli Baba, and you're right about the miracles. There's so much cool stuff there. And for people who aren't familiar, go dig into it. I think you'll find something interesting and something valuable in that, and all of it. And it's easy to find some of this stuff too. Ram Dass is one of the great talkers of the 20th century. And so there's hours and hours and hours and hours of recorded talk. He's very frequently weaving his personal story in with sort of more spiritual messages. So it's kind of all there. But didn't Neem Karoli Baba tell Ram Dass explicitly, like, don't tell anybody about me? When you go back to the United States, don't say a word about me.
I love that, because you may have heard, what is his name? And I promise I want to hear the rest of the story. What's this? Oh, he's so famous right now. It'll come to me, but he says that we cannot think in negatives. It's impossible. That the human mind does not perceive negatives. So don't think of a pink elephant.
Right.
So the perfect thing to tell someone is don't tell anyone, because you're saying the words "tell anyone," and that's all the brain hears.
Right.
The first rule of what's this guy's name?
What, of Neem Karoli Baba?
The first rule of Neem Karoli Baba is you do not talk about Neem Karoli Baba.
Right, exactly.
Don't make
in the whole world.
Yeah. But no, it's true. It's he knew that Ram Dass was immediately going to go home and talk about it, right? And this is common throughout. I mean, this is, to me, is God saying, "Hey, don't eat the apple." That was you should probably eat the apple.
Right.
But anyway, but it's just a fascinating part of the story, because Ram Dass immediately comes home and disobeys that, and is spreading the Neem Karoli Baba gospel, as it were, throughout the United States, at the same time that Tim Leary is spreading the tune in, turn on and drop out message at the same time.
Yeah.
Well,
Timmy always sort of cleaved to science. He kept a veneer of the scientism about him. Brad, it sounds like you have something else, but then I have a couple of more readings to kind of bring us back to. Okay. Well, one is from Timothy Leary, a biography by Robert Greenfield, which we leaned on during the core episode. I don't think we need to worry too much about linear time during this episode about these great fistful of acid gurus. Here's a bit about Alpert. A self-professed mediocre student who had failed to win admittance to Harvard as an undergraduate and instead had attended Tufts and Wesleyan, Alpert's Harvard faculty position meant far more to him than it ever did to Tim. Alpert taught courses in human motivation, Freudian theory, and child development. He held appointments in 4 different departments: social relations, psychology, the Graduate School of Education, and health services. Busy man. Mm-hmm. He also had research contracts with Yale and Stanford to assist him in his labors. So a rock star, young, on his way to tenure, a lot to lose.
Yeah, bi-coastal in the 50s. Kind of guy. Yeah.
Or he's taking the train. I'm going to take the family rails. No, of course.
For a while, he was flying his own plane between the coasts.
Okay. I had the thought earlier that a good metaphor for acid now would be, if you tried to explain it to some Zoomer, would be like you're having the greatest DM conversation that you've ever had, and then suddenly you're left on read.
Yeah, that's what it is.
You know what I'm talking about, Kellen? They leave you on read.
No idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You can see they've read your message, but they don't reply.
Yeah.
You've been left on read.
That's like being kicked out of heaven. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. For a Zoomer.
Right. Yeah. In any case, when she leaves you on read. To assist him in his labors, he had 2 secretaries and several graduate and undergraduate assistants. Adored by children, he was the godfather of David McClellan's twin sons, the son of George Elpert, a wealthy lawyer who had helped found Brandeis University and who, while serving as the president of the New Haven Railroad, owned a limousine with an extra set of steel wheels so it could run on train tracks. Richard, he's it's like a Batman
like
villain. Yeah, right. Richard Alpert lived in an antique-filled apartment in Cambridge. He owned a Mercedes-Benz sedan, an MG sports car, a Triumph 500cc motorcycle, a sailboat, and a Cessna 172 airplane. Totally
It is, yeah.
Yeah. In New York City, he had access to the railroad's penthouse apartment on Park Avenue, company limousines, and the inner sanctums of Grand Central Station, which I think we talked about. Despite all of this, Alpert shared with Tim Leary a basic lack of contentment, not with just himself, but also with the material world. Alpert internalized his feelings. And this is him saying, in the face of this feeling of malaise, I ate more, collected more possessions, collected more appointments and positions and status, more sexual and alcoholic orgies, and more wildness in my life. After Tim introduced him to psychedelic mushrooms, Alpert would say, I knew I wasn't an intellectual. I'd gotten to Harvard on charm. I wasn't real. I was a phony. But I had conned everybody, and here I was, a Harvard professor, so everyone assumed I knew, and they were going to give me tenure, and I could make believe I knew for the rest of my life. But I knew I didn't. After being with Timothy, a couple of things happened. I began to the practice of psychedelics, and I would look at my colleagues and realize they didn't know either. And that was fascinating because these were the lions of academia. I was ready to devote my life to Timothy because I felt, now here is a man who is a real visionary. He sees through the system and he can truly stand back and look. We had so many extraordinary conversations. It was such fun.
Yeah.
You know, he described his time with that personality of that somebodiness as wearing an ill-fitted suit.
Mm-hmm.
That's what his personality felt like at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, he does. He talks something about, he has some anecdote or allegory he tells about. It's like going to get a suit. You go to get a suit fit, but you're actually, your posture is all screwed up. And so you try to tailor the suit around your terrible posture. And that's how you end up in this very weird situation he was in this somebody training. And I know we were kind of mocking a little bit and fairly the whole middle class thing, but like there is a certain potency and a quality that kind of makes me raise my eyebrows is when you give all of that up. Because how many people really give all of that up? Not very many, right? It's few and far between. Exactly.
A lot to lose.
Right. Mm-hmm. So to me, that gives the guy a lot of credence. I mean, for anybody who sort of thinks he's just a kind of a flim-flam artist.
It's fair to compare him, I would say, to the Buddha in that sense. Mm-hmm. This is a prince. Among men, certainly he's an American Harvard in the 50s. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's a prince of the whole professional, managerial, industrial, educational class. Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And then I have another reading. This is from the New Yorker with their wonderful fonts. This is just a short reading, but kind of I always know when it's a
ladies and gentlemen, Kevin needs a minute. Just enjoy the fonts, Kevin. Just breathe them in.
Very nice. Boy. As is well known, Leary soon abandoned clinical protocols, distributing LSD and psilocybin to students and his friends. Leary and Alpert's 9-page 1962 summary of their initial research, Americans and Mushrooms in a Naturalistic Environment, a preliminary report, may have been interesting to read, but in response to another proposed study, Leary's supervisors argued that the cause of long-term observational data was not well served by terms like groovy and love and love engineering. Ulrich
Ooh.
includes a letter to Leary from a Harvard faculty member instructing him to stop telling Sandoz, the provider of psilocybin, that his experiments were for the academy. Harvard fired Leary in 1963 when his informal dispensary attracted too much controversy. And anyway, it goes on. But yes, groovy probably doesn't belong in the report.
Oh, is that what I've been doing wrong? Is that what I was doing wrong when I was in academia? I used groovy a lot.
Admit me into your PhD program. It's going to be a groovy time.
Oh man.
Yeah, so what a wild road for these two fellows to get kicked out of Harvard, and then for Ram Dass to go to India. He came back from India as Ram Dass, or did he take that?
Yeah. So yeah, he was given the name Ram Dass, Baba Ram Dass, but everyone just calls him Ram Dass, and he wrote Be Here Now, I want to say, about that experience, and then became just like a global sensation, just became this sort of cultural icon as, his words, a Hindu.
He's very
Tremendous.
self-deprecating, because he also jokes about he came back as Ram Dass, or as my brother would call me, Ram Dass.
His father never bit on this either. Till his they find in his dying breaths, like his father, I sort of had like a thing, like they connected in some kind of way, but it was always just parlor tricks to his dad. There was no deeper sort of. He's just like, I'm kids,
Right.
But if you were feeling critical or cynical about it, you could say, look, this is all cope because you got kicked out of Harvard. Right. I mean, if you were not feeling generous, I don't fall on that side of the street. But if you were looking for kind of a cynical, hard-nosed, got a scotch in your hand, and you could sort of, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And you could also, I mean, I could also see, but see, he was like, I wish I had it in front of me. I don't know how old. He wasn't a kid anymore when he went to India. I think he was already in his 40s, I want to say. So it's not like you're not talking about like a 22-year-old, right? You're talking about a grown man who's had a career, and it didn't end well, but certainly had a network of contacts and things. He could have just, he could have moved into occupational therapy, or he could have migrated into some kind of consulting work or something very easily.
So thank you, Brad. It's time for me to do a reading, Kevin. Do you mind if I do a reading?
That's awesome.
Would that be okay?
Not at all. Go. I think what we're doing here, we are doing a Timmy Leary dark room, but I think we're also giving a teaser for a future
Ram Dass episode,
Ram Dass core episode that Kellen Kellen, you might have to ride along for that one.
Oh, I would love to.
Okay. All right. We're teasing it, but this is okay. Go on.
So 1931, April 6th. Is when Richard Alpert was born. So help me remember 1931, because in 1967, and Brad was 100% right about this, Bhagavan Das guided Alpert throughout India, eventually introducing him to Neem Karoli Baba, whom Alpert called Maharaji, who became his guru at the Kainchi ashram. Neem Karoli Baba gave Alpert the name Ram Das, which means servant of God, referring to the incarnation of God as Ram, or Lord Rama. Alpert also corresponded with Indian spiritual teacher Mahir Baba. And then after Alpert returned to America as Ram Dass, he stayed at the Lama Foundation in Taos, New Mexico as a guest. Let's see. And then during Ram Dass's visit, he presented a manuscript he had written entitled From Bindu to Ojas, the community's residents, edited, illustrated, and laid out the text, which ultimately became a best-selling book when he published it under the name Be Here Now. 460-page manual on consciousness.
And that's that book isn't so much, I mean, it is a book, but it's not just a bunch of pages of text. It's a sort of multimedia. I mean, there's drawings and sketches, and it's a very of its time. I mean, you pick it up and you know that this came out in the late 60s. And
I wonder how many people over the years, how many hundreds of thousands or millions of people have taken a little something maybe a fistful of something, and ended up totally couch locked with that book.
Oh, dude, astrally projected into, a universe of love and understanding. He was 36.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so 36 years old when he went to India, right? So yeah, he's a full grown man, and yeah, he comes back with that book, and then it was pretty much. I mean, he was a continuously relevant spiritual teacher from then on, basically. Oh yeah, until a couple of years ago when he died.
That's right.
Yeah, and yeah, he's an interesting guy. And Be Here Now is like it's worth reading for sure. I mean, just the fundamental, the title. We were making fun of Midwit Lit yesterday, but like the title is huge. Like Be Here Now. It sounds, that's easy to do. That's really easy to do. It's not easy to do. It's almost impossible to do. Try to do it. Try to actually just be present without judging anything that's happened before or that's coming, without anticipating anything, without wanting anything. Just be. It's almost impossible to do.
He ended up actually reducing that towards the end of his life to less than just the words "be here now," those 3 syllables. At the end of his life, he looked at Duncan Trussell, which I know you two are probably huge fans of.
Yeah.
And him and Duncan Trussell were in a pool, and all of his post-stroke stuff, which he described as fierce grace. So it was the fierce grace of God stroking him, is the way he put it. He synthesized his entire teaching to this, which is
this is principally an audio podcast. You couldn't really see Kellen, but I can give you a play-by-play. He kind of leaned back ever so slightly in his chair, made a smile, and kind of almost imperceptibly exhaled.
Yeah.
They define nirvana as blowing the candle out. Right? It just means to exhale, essentially.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, let's come back on the After Dark and talk more about Timmy Leary, their time at Harvard, the great Baba Ram Dass, who we will have to do a core episode of probably at this rate in 2024.
Yeah.
But very exciting stuff. Kellen, really grateful to have you on. It's good to have you. You're obviously your family, but now you're part of the Dead Place. You're part of the Art of Darkness family.
Yeah.
The warmest.
I feel like I read the entire Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, without having to read it. That's what it feels like being on this podcast.
That's what we go for. I have one more reading from the bio to anchor this back with Timmy Leary and to reiterate the point about Ram Dass being forgiving of Leary, even though they did have their differences. Timothy Leary celebrated his 75th birthday at home on Saturday night, October 21st, 1995. This reading is going to give people who may not quite get it yet an idea of just how big these two fellows were in the culture, even all the way through the 90s and Ram Dass into nearly the present day. They had this huge party at the house, which was insane, Leslie Myers recalled. It must have gone out over the internet because there were at least 800 people up there. When Myers reached the top of Tim's Road, and this would have been in LA, valet parkers told her that they had been full for the past 3 hours. Myers got past them by saying she was Dr. Leary's daughter. Well, that'll help. She parked behind the catering truck and went to Tim's front door only to discover a huge bouncer guarding it with 50 people waiting to get inside. It's for a dude's 75th birthday party.
Hey.
Repeating the lie that she was Tim's daughter, Myers walked right past him. Inside the house, she remembered, it was insanity. You literally couldn't move. All night long, people were walking up to me asking if I could get other people in. I know he's a friend of your dad, they kept saying. Stars like Tony Curtis, Liza Minnelli, and Trent Reznor had turned out to honor Tim. That was a bash, Douglas Rushkoff recalled. The great party of parties in Tim's final phase. Those who had known Tim in a previous incarnation were horrified. It was really depressing, Alan U. Schwartz remembered. A public spectacle. There were people coming up the driveway who had never met Timothy Leary in their lives, but they were going to this party, hundreds and hundreds of people. Take a snapshot of that and compare it to an intimate dinner with Helmut and June Newton and my wife and I. The quantum leaps of what happens in a life are evident. On November 1st, Dennis Berry moved out of Tim's house to return to Santa Cruz. Her departure caused a seismic shift in his life. My leaving destabilized the house, Berry recalled. I wouldn't have allowed the circus to go on, and Tim might not have needed it. Tim added to the chaos by firing Shaban Sur, an assistant who, along with Vicky Marshall, had been helping to manage his affairs. Without these people around, the circus kicked off in high gear. All right. Like a great king throwing open the front gates of his court, Tim began receiving an endless succession of former associates, friends, and lovers, all of whom felt the need to pay their respects. Allen Ginsberg, William Burroughs, Laura Huxley, and Ram Dass all came to visit him out in LA after he had had.
Wow. So, jeez.
And then he had more time with Ram Dass, and they must have had their kind of last hurrahs and a bit of a, maybe they sat back and looked at each other and did what Kellen did.
Yeah, probably. Oh, that's beautiful.
All right, well let's come back in a few minutes and we'll do the After Dark. What are we going to do? So specifically, what are we talking about, Brad?
Yeah, so I've got some stuff from a book primarily from a book called The Harvard Psychedelic Club, and this is a little sort of inside baseball on exactly what the events leading up to specifically Richard Alpert getting kicked out, but Tim Leary got kicked out at the same time, as instigated by a leading figure in the integrative and holistic health world.
So there's more to the story behind them getting kicked out than meets the eye.
Yes,
there was a bit of a rivalry going on, huh?
Yes, yeah, we're gonna get some details on that, so that should be interesting.
And Kellen, I truly do want to hear more about the Hare Krishna business. Absolutely. And what Ram Dass means to you and all the rest of it. I feel like you could go on for quite a long time.
I want to give the listeners a mantra that they didn't ask for.
Yes, please do, Kellen. Yes.
And this is important. So we've already talked about it today, but there's this great Buddhist teacher who I loved who mentioned that the silence between our mantra is as important as the words themselves. And so here's your mantra. You only have to repeat this for the rest of your life. Love every one.
Oh.
There you have it. Enjoy.
Lovely.